A theory that seems to have been discreetly floating around the Naruto community for a while now is the idea that Itachi was Jiraiya's spy in the Akatsuki or was at least his informant. I'm surprised this theory hasn't caught on more because the implications of it being true are pretty comparable to a lot of other really popular fan theories for Naruto. In fact, this theory is so under the radar that I forgot to put it in my final Naruto Mysteries iceberg, despite originally wanting to include it. Of course, the top comment on that video reminded me of my mistake, so I'm here to rectify it now. On the surface level of this theory, most people will just say that it makes sense or it doesn't make sense, but I have found some evidence that makes this a lot deeper than any discussion I've seen on it so far. In fact, I think it fully decides whether the theory is true or not. I'll present all the facts we know first before giving my opinion, because this goes a lot deeper than I had first anticipated. Let's start with just understanding what both of these characters' roles are as spies, because it could help us speculate if their jobs could overlap with one another. Itachi's complicated relationship with a leaf was one fully explained 3 times in the manga. First by Obito to Sasuke after Itachi died, then Hiruzen to Sasuke when Orochimaru reanimated the first 4 Hokage, and then Itachi to Sasuke right before his Edo Tensei contract released. Of those 3 explanations, only Hiruzen mentions that Itachi was a spy who kept tabs on the Akatsuki for the leaf. And despite Hiruzen saying that Itachi was a spy, there's no direct evidence that Itachi ever shared any kind of intelligence with Konoha. Jiraiya is the opposite. There are numerous moments throughout the series that directly prove that Jiraiya was gathering intelligence on the Akatsuki and Orochimaru. We first see a flashback of him explaining the Akatsuki to Kakashi, though he self-admittedly only knew a few things about them at that point. He ultimately says that he only found out about it because he was keeping tabs on Orochimaru. At the end of part 1, Jiraiya tells Naruto that his sources tell him that the Akatsuki won't be after Naruto for 3 more years, but he never says who these sources are despite Naruto later asking about it. Later on, before his fight against Pain, he speculates that Madara was behind the Nine Tails attack, but never gives a reason other than having a bad feeling. There's some other examples of him talking about gathered intel, but not saying how he got it, so I won't list them because that's the case for every single time he gets intel. So looking at the nature of both of their jobs, it seems we don't know much about how either of them function. We know Jiraiya gets intel, but he never explains how. Itachi is even worse because even though Hiruzen said he was a spy, there's no direct evidence that he ever gave intel back to the leaf. There's so little focus on this that even Itachi, Danzo, and Obito don't even mention that Itachi was an Akatsuki spy to Sasuke. Whereas with Jiraiya, he often was the leaf's information source in the plot because it fits with his job title. So with just the basic facts that we know about these 2 jobs, there's not much to go off here. It's one of those theories where people just say it's a cool idea and subscribe to it based purely off the fact that they are both spies. I was once like this, but once I started to chronologically analyze Itachi's actions with Jiraiya's actions, there's a lot of evidence that suggests Itachi was informing Jiraiya. Let's go all the way back to when Itachi and Kisame infiltrated the Leaf Village in part 1. There we saw the flashback I mentioned earlier of Kakashi and Jiraiya talking before the Chunin exam finals about the Akatsuki. Jiraiya only knew a handful of things about the Akatsuki at that point. He knew Orochimaru had joined and left, he knew they had 9 members who were rogue shinobi, and he knew that they were in teams of 2. Somehow Jiraiya also knew that Itachi was in the organization, despite there being 8 other members he could have learned about. This wasn't because he knew Orochimaru left the organization after fighting Itachi. He never says why Orochimaru left, and this suggests that he just doesn't know why Orochimaru left. So it's a bit odd that he knows Itachi was in the organization, but did not know Kisame was even in it, even though they were teammates that did every single mission together. Maybe this was because Itachi was leaking information on the Akatsuki, or maybe Itachi wanted to give Jiraiya a lead by somehow letting Jiraiya know that he was in it. In this meeting, Jiraiya speculates that the Akatsuki want the Nine Tails, but says there's no clues confirming that. Going forward to Kakashi's fight against Itachi, Kakashi ignores that idea and instead tells Itachi that Itachi must be looking for Sasuke. Itachi informs him that he's after the 4th Hokage's legacy, which makes Kakashi have that flashback about that meeting and then realize that Naruto is the real target. This might be the only direct instance of Itachi leaking intel to the Akatsuki, but instead of doing it covertly, he indirectly gives information in conversation, like a lot of villains in the series did. Jumping forward to the end of part 1, Jiraiya coincidentally learns about that the Akatsuki won't search for Naruto for the next few years. If we map out what Jiraiya was doing after Itachi and Kisame infiltrated the Leaf, he actually found out about this new information really fast, all things considered. Jiraiya and Naruto were on their way to find Tsunade when Itachi and Kisame confronted them, and they continued to do so immediately after the Akatsuki duo fled the Leaf. During this journey, Jiraiya spent the whole time searching for Tsunade, so he wouldn't have had time to try to gather intel on the Akatsuki. Once he finds Tsunade, a week passes before the Sannin showdown, but we don't know what he does for most of that time. The only time we see him on a panel is he's either talking to Tsunade or worrying about Tsunade, so I doubt he had time to focus on the Akatsuki then. The Sannin showdown happens, and then he travels back to the Leaf, no longer needing to gather intel on Tsunade. This is the first opportunity he gets to start investigating the Akatsuki again, and somehow by the end of the arc he already knows the Akatsuki aren't mobilizing for a few years. And he learned this in the span of possibly 3 days. We know Sasuke is woken up by Tsunade the day she returns, and he leaves the Leaf that night. We know the mission only occurred during the daylight hours of the next day, and we know Naruto woke up the next day because when Ino tells Sakura everyone made it back, Sakura visits and awake Naruto the next day. After Sakura's visit, the next thing we see is Jiraiya visiting Naruto in the hospital. While we don't know how long of a time gap that is, we do see that Naruto is not any more healed than he was when Sakura visited him. I wouldn't say that any more than a week max had passed since Jiraiya resumed his investigation on the Akatsuki at the beginning of the arc, and yet he already found out information on their plans 3 years into the future. Personally, it feels like this is an instance where he's getting major intel very easily. But that's not my main point of evidence. Things really get coincidental when we jump forward to the deaths of these two. In their final arcs alive, Jiraiya suddenly learns some key information again, with one piece of information almost having to have come from Itachi. First off, it's odd that once Itachi arranges for his own death fighting against Sasuke, we see Jiraiya suddenly finds out that the leader of the Akatsuki is in the Rain Village. Jiraiya had presented no new information on the Akatsuki up to that point in part 2, other than he knew they were beginning to mobilize in the first arc. So it seems funny that Jiraiya found out about this at just the right time for him to infiltrate the Rain Village on the same day that Itachi died fighting Sasuke. Now you could argue that Itachi would have gave Jiraiya more information since he had nothing left to lose, but realistically Itachi did not know much more than Jiraiya did by the end of their lives. Itachi didn't know about Obito's plans, for example. He knew how the Akatsuki operated, and he also knew that their ultimate goal was to capture all the tailed beasts. Jiraiya knew the same general concepts, and the last thing he could have learned was the Akatsuki's only center for operations in the Rain Village. So by Itachi's death, Jiraiya had coincidentally learned every single thing Itachi knew about the Akatsuki, including the belief that Tobi was Madara Uchiha. Itachi told Sasuke that Madara was behind the Nine Tails attack, and helped with the Uchiha massacre. This wasn't just Itachi lying to Sasuke like usual. When he was reanimated in the war arc, he only referred to Obito as Madara, even going back to the Pure Land with that belief. Now, how did Jiraiya also conclude that the Nine Tails attack was Madara's doing despite no one else in the series thinking that beforehand? The only people that thought Madara was still alive at this point in the story was Jiraiya, Itachi, and Pain, but even all the other Akatsuki members were sold on the Tobi persona. Kisame himself was also fooled despite Obito revealing himself to Kisame back when Kisame first joined the Akatsuki. So with Obito and Pain not being spies against the Akatsuki, the only way that Jiraiya could have learned this was from Itachi one way or another. Of course, when questioned on how he learned about this, he says it's a hunch and just an estimation, but he has said this several other times when asked on his sources that ended up being true. Often saying things like rumor has it or it's just a possibility. It all just seems so perfect that Itachi told Jiraiya this. Not even most Akatsuki members thought this, so the only source of this hunch had to have been from Itachi. But there's even more evidence supporting this. During the Kage Summit, Danzo was the first to break the idea of Madara Uchiha leading the Akatsuki to the world, but he differs in his approach than Jiraiya. Jiraiya says conjecture is his reasoning for that idea, but Danzo says that his source is certain of this idea, despite Danzo not thinking it made any sense. Key word there is source being singular and not plural. The only person who would have been giving away that information was Itachi, and we knew that Itachi was a spy for the Leaf. Danzo knew Itachi was a spy, so more than likely Itachi just directly told Danzo this right before his death, similar how he likely told Jiraiya Pain's location and Tobi's identity right before his death too. The point I'm trying to make here is that if Itachi most likely informed Danzo on this, why would he not just inform Jiraiya as well? And that goes for all these bits of evidence I brought up. Why would Itachi not just tell Jiraiya indirectly the intel he was sending back to the Leaf? I will clarify that I don't believe Jiraiya was aware of the Uchiha massacre. Some people have brought this up in two ways. Some say that because Jiraiya didn't know, he must have not gotten information from Itachi then. Others who believe in this theory think that this must mean that Jiraiya knew about the massacre if Itachi was giving him information. I don't believe that because Obito says that only the elders knew, and there's no evidence suggesting that Jiraiya knew. This doesn't mean that Itachi couldn't have been his informant. It just means he could have been informing Jiraiya indirectly. While Itachi could have given Danzo information directly, Itachi could have leaked information in a way that would eventually reach Jiraiya. This could mean giving information to bounty collectors that the Akatsuki hunted bounties for, since those were loose ends. It could also mean Itachi intentionally let messages get intercepted by Jiraiya. However it may have happened, there's just too much evidence suggesting that Itachi was purposely letting information reach Jiraiya. I'll recap those points real quick before making a final point and a conclusion. When Jiraiya first learned about the Akatsuki, the only active member he could name was Itachi, despite there being 8 other members. First week Jiraiya could investigate the Akatsuki after confronting Itachi. He learned information on the Akatsuki's plans several years into the future. Jiraiya doesn't share anything new in part 2 until he suddenly finds out that the leader of the Akatsuki is in the Rain Village. This happens right after Itachi finds out Sasuke is hunting him, and Jiraiya finds pain the same day that Itachi dies. Furthermore, Jiraiya suddenly starts thinking Madara Uchiha attacked the Leaf Village, which is a belief only Itachi and maybe Pain thought at the time. And we almost know for certain that Itachi told Danzo this, so it makes sense that Itachi would tell Jiraiya this as well. Every time we see Jiraiya learn something about the Akatsuki, it has Itachi's fingerprints all over it. The last point I want to bring up is that the other great nations knew next to nothing about the Akatsuki at the Five Kage Summit, while Jiraiya knew about as much as Itachi knew. During the actual summit, a lot of misinformation and conjecture is spewed between all the Kage except Danzo. Gaara spent the whole summit confused, while the Raikage spewed both information and misinformation. A pointed out that the stone used the Akatsuki in missions, but falsely pointed out that the Akatsuki could have started in the Hidden Mist. Mei then says that she speculates that the Akatsuki was controlling Yagura, but ultimately says that she does not know. Danzo's the exception because he got his intel from Itachi, but how could Jiraiya have been so much more knowledgeable than 4 other great nations combined? I know Jiraiya is supposed to be a great spy, but that's quite a feat. That was really my last point, so I'll wrap it up now. With everything I presented, I don't see how we can't say Itachi was almost certainly Jiraiya's source on the Akatsuki. The most damning bits of information are how every time Itachi's active in the story, Jiraiya learns something new, and that Jiraiya started to believe in Madara being alive around the same time that Danzo did. Itachi's the only person that could have leaked that at the time. I will end this video by bringing up some possible counterpoints, but know that I subscribe to the theory of Itachi intentionally, indirectly giving information to Jiraiya. Firstly, it is possible that Jiraiya just learned all this stuff through the grapevine, or he could have just found out everything by himself. It's also possible that Jiraiya could have learned this intel from investigating Danzo and the Root. The last word of advice Jiraiya actually has for Tsunade is that she should beware of them, so it's possible he was investigating them. He could have learned the intel that Itachi gave to Danzo from spying on Danzo. I doubt Danzo would have told Jiraiya since we don't even see Danzo tell Tsunade anything. He hated her for embodying the ideas of Hiruzen, and Jiraiya was no different. There's another counter theory that I think is more plausible, but not as plausible as the one I believe in. Another theory I've seen some champion is that Orochimaru and Kabuto were the ones giving Jiraiya all this information. They certainly have a motive and they have intel. During the Tenchi Bridge arc, they both stress that they will not kill any Leaf Shinobi for the near future because they wanted them to keep taking out Akatsuki members. So it makes sense they'd want to find a way for Jiraiya to get their intel. The problem is the times don't line up like they do with Itachi. Like I've been saying, Jiraiya didn't learn anything new in the first half of part 2, which would have been the time Orochimaru would most likely want to share that intel. It also would not explain how Jiraiya learned about Madara, since Orochimaru and Kabuto never believed in Madara being alive. So while this all could be possible, the Itachi theory has a lot more evidence backing it up. But that's really all I have to say on this. If there are any other obscure theories y'all think I should investigate, please comment them in this video. Just make sure I didn't already cover them in my iceberg video. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos in the future. Comment something you have something to say, and thank y'all for watching. I guess I'll see y'all next time.